There's a very particular kind of conversation that never really ends. It just circles, looping back on itself, picking up the same ideas, the same frustrations, the same words in slightly different shapes, and somehow each time it comes around it feels heavier instead of clearer. And that's the feeling I keep coming back to when I think about All in the Family, especially in those episodes where the argument itself becomes the entire experience, where nothing is really solved, and yet everything important is revealed in the process of going nowhere. I'm thinking about one of those living room episodes where the topic seems simple at first, something like whether someone should accept help from the government during a tough financial stretch, which in another show might be a setup for a quick misunderstanding and a neat resolution. But here it becomes something else entirely, something slower, something more layered, something that doesn't move forward so much as it spirals. It starts, like it often does, with Archie settling into his chair, that familiar posture that feels like a declaration in itself, as if the chair isn't just a place to sit but a position to defend. And there's already a mood in the room before anyone says anything, a quiet readiness for disagreement, like everyone knows this isn't going to be a calm conversation even if it begins that way. Is nearby, moving gently through the space, bringing in small comforts, offering warmth in the way she always does, and there's something almost delicate about her presence at the start, like she's trying to hold the room together before it begins to pull apart, even though she probably senses that she won't be able to stop what's coming. Then Mike brings up the idea, not aggressively, not as a challenge, but as a suggestion, something practical, something that might help. And in another household, it might just be a discussion about options, about what's available, about what makes sense. But in this room, with these people, it becomes something much bigger almost instantly. Archie reacts, not just to the idea itself, but to what it represents, because to him accepting help isn't just about money. It's about pride. It's about identity. It's about what it means to be a working man who provides for his family, and so even a calm suggestion feels like a threat, like a question about his worth. At first, the disagreement is manageable, just a few back and forth comments, each person stating their perspective, and there's even a hint of humor in it, that familiar rhythm where you can laugh at the stubbornness, laugh at the misunderstandings, laugh at the way they talk around each other instead of to each other. But then it comes back again, the same point, slightly reframed, slightly reworded, and that's where you start to feel the circular nature of it. Because instead of moving toward resolution, they move back into the same territory, the same disagreement, the same emotional ground. Mike tries to explain his position more clearly, adding more context, more reasoning, believing that if he just explains it better, if he just fills in the gaps, then maybe Archie will understand. But the more he explains, the more it feels like he's talking to a wall, not because Archie isn't listening, but because he's listening through a completely different lens. Gloria steps in, trying to bridge the gap, trying to translate between them, because she understands both sides in a way that makes it harder, not easier, for her to stay neutral. And her attempts to smooth things out only add another layer to the conversation, another voice, another perspective, another loop in the circle. And quietly, gently, offers something softer, not a solution, not an argument, but a kind of emotional grounding, reminding them in small ways that they're a family, that they care about each other, that this doesn't have to become something bigger than it already is. But her softness doesn't break the cycle. It just exists alongside it. What's fascinating is how the show lets this repetition happen without rushing to interrupt it, without forcing a resolution. It trusts that the audience will recognize the pattern, that they'll feel the frustration of hearing the same points come around again and again, slightly changed but fundamentally the same. And that frustration becomes part of the comedy, not in the sense of big laughs, but in that uneasy kind of recognition, that feeling of "I've seen this before," that sense of being trapped in a conversation that doesn't progress, that just keeps circling. Archie doubles down, not because he's trying to win in a strategic way, but because backing down would mean admitting something he's not ready to admit. And so each time the argument comes back around, he holds his ground a little more firmly, his tone a little sharper, his words a little more defensive. Mike responds in kind, not letting the point go, because for him it's about fairness, about acknowledging reality, about not ignoring what's available just because it challenges an older way of thinking. And so he keeps pushing, keeps explaining, keeps returning to the same idea from slightly different angles. And so the argument loops again, and again, and again, each time carrying more emotional weight, because it's no longer just about the original topic. It's about the accumulation of everything that's been said, everything that hasn't been understood, everything that feels unresolved. This is where the living room setting becomes so important, because there's nowhere to escape, no change of scene to break the cycle, no external event to interrupt the conversation. It's just these four people in the same space, circling the same argument, and that creates a kind of intensity that feels almost theatrical. You can feel the walls closing in, not physically, but emotionally as the conversation continues without resolution, as the same points echo back and forth, as the same frustrations resurface in slightly different forms. And in the context of 1970s America, this kind of conversation carried a lot of weight, because it reflected real debates happening in households across the country, about government, about responsibility, about changing social systems, about what it meant to adapt or resist. The show didn't shy away from those topics. It brought them right into the living room, made them personal, made them unavoidable. And in doing so, it changed what television could do. It showed that comedy could hold tension instead of releasing it, that it could make people uncomfortable and still keep them watching. The discomfort is essential here, because without it, the repetition would feel pointless. But with it, the repetition feels meaningful. It feels like a reflection of how these conversations actually happen, how people can get stuck in cycles of disagreement without realizing it. There are moments where it seems like they might break out of the loop, where someone pauses, where the tone softens, where it feels like maybe, just maybe, they've reached a point of understanding. But then something pulls them back. A word, a tone, a memory of what was said earlier, and the circle continues. This presence becomes even more important in those moments, because she offers a kind of emotional continuity, a reminder that beneath all the disagreement, there's still care, still connection, still something worth preserving, even if the conversation itself isn't going anywhere. And that's part of what makes the show so powerful. It doesn't resolve the argument, but it doesn't destroy the relationships either. It allows both things to exist at the same time, the tension and the connection, the frustration and the care. By the time the episode starts to wind down, there's no clear winner, no moment where one side convinces the other, no neat conclusion that ties everything together. Instead, there's a kind of quiet exhaustion, a sense that they've said everything they can say, even if none of it has changed anything. The conversation doesn't end so much as it fades. The energy dissipates, the voices lower, the room settles, but the underlying disagreement is still there, still unresolved, still waiting to come back again in another form, in another conversation. And that's such an honest way to end it, because that's how these arguments often work in real life. They don't end with a clear resolution. They just pause, they just take a break. They just wait for the next time they'll be revisited. Personally, I find that kind of storytelling incredibly compelling, even if it's a little uncomfortable to sit with, because it feels true. It feels like something I've experienced. That sense of going in circles, of repeating the same points, of feeling like you're not being heard even as you keep talking. And I think that's why All in the Family still feels relevant today, because those patterns haven't changed. People still have these conversations, still get stuck in these loops, still struggle to move past their own perspectives. The humor in this case isn't about resolving the tension. It's about recognizing it, about seeing the absurdity in the repetition, about understanding how people can be so certain and so stuck at the same time. And there's something almost reflective about the way the episode ends, the way it leaves you with that unresolved feeling, that sense that nothing has been fixed, but something has been shown, something has been made visible. You start to think about your own conversations, your own arguments, the ways they circle, the ways they repeat, the ways they don't always lead to understanding. And that's where the show really connects, not just as entertainment, but as something that mirrors real life in a way that's hard to ignore. So when the screen fades and the room goes quiet again, there's no big takeaway, no clear lesson, just that lingering sense of having witnessed something real, something messy, something unresolved, and maybe that's exactly why it stays with you, why it keeps you thinking about it long after it's over.